What if a 7-year-old girl holds the key to saving a child's life, a secret no one else saw? In a world where wealth and power seem to control everything, one little girl proved that sometimes courage and a sharp mind are all you need to change everything. Meet Mary Mason, a 7-year-old with the bravery to confront a billionaire and uncover a life-saving secret that no one else could see. But the truth she uncovered was more than just a medical mystery. It was a story of love, sacrifice, and family. Two families bound by fate and a life-or-death situation are about to be united by the unlikeliest of heroes, a child. Stay tuned to discover how one young girl's determination rewrote the destiny of not just one but two families and brought hope where there was none. The wind howled violently, carrying with it the yellowed leaves of autumn that slammed against the large glass window, creating a melancholic symphony for the storm raging outside. Inside the Westbrook mansion, a fortress of glass and marble nestled in a vast estate on the outskirts of Chicago, the silence was more terrifying than any sound. The soft golden light from the crystal chandeliers cascaded down, reflecting on the polished marble floor, creating a space that was both grand and cold. John Westbrook stood there facing the transparent window. His tall figure, though imposing, seemed heartbreakingly solitary. The Armani charcoal gray suit hugged the perfect form of a successful 42-year-old man. He was a living symbol of power and wealth. 15 years ago, he had been a reckless young man who turned a small, inherited fortune into Westbrook Industries, a mighty pharmaceutical empire that had touched every continent. He had grown accustomed to winning every battle, whether it was a billion-dollar deal or facing the fiercest opponents. But right now, he was confronted with an invisible and ruthless enemy, one against which all his money and power were useless. Behind John, on a luxurious cream-colored upholstered sofa, Edward, his 5-year-old son, was lost in his own world. The boy with his shining golden hair and sparkling blue eyes like two gems sat cross-legged on the oversized chair, surrounded by a multitude of expensive toys. Edward had no idea that his fate was being decided only a few steps away from him. The innocent boy tilted his head, focusing on coloring a picture of a spaceship flying among the stars, a vibrant world, in stark contrast to the dark tones of reality. The dry click of the medical bag closing echoed throughout the vast room like the sound of a death knell. Dr. Mitchell, who had cared for the Westbrook family's health for over a decade, exhaled heavily. He removed his reading glasses, his eyes etched with the wrinkles of age and worry. "I'm sorry, John," his voice cracked. "The final test results are in. Despite trying every method, the boy's condition is worsening faster than we anticipated. Without special treatment, Ethan, he only has about 2 weeks." 2 weeks. The amount of time it takes for a dry leaf to fall from a branch, for a flower to wither, too short to do something great, but too long for this father to watch his son's life slowly slip away. John's face remained cold, a mask honed through thousands of intense negotiations. Only his hands clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white, betrayed the storm raging within. He had spent millions building hospitals, funding hundreds of medical research projects, but now his own son could not be saved. "There's nothing that can't be bought, Dr. Mitchell," John said, his voice deep and firm without a trace of emotion. "Any hospital, any specialist, any country. Just tell me I'll have my private jet ready." Dr. Mitchell shook his head, his face filled with despair. "This time it's not a matter of money, John. The only treatment that could save Edward is an experimental method. There's only one person in the world who has successfully done it. And she's unreachable right now." John's calm finally shattered. "What do you mean?" He snapped, his voice sharp. "My son has 2 weeks to live, and you're telling me the only person who can save him is unreachable." Dr. Avery Chapman is working on a humanitarian project in a remote village in Guatemala. The roads have been destroyed by storms and all communication has been cut off, Dr. Mitchell explained. It will take at least a few more days to locate her, and even then the treatment will require special preparation and genetic material from family members. John felt a surge of heat run down his spine. "I don't care," he shouted, veins bulging in his neck from fury. "Find her. Send a search team. Send the military. Send anyone. Find her and bring her here." His shouting made Edward look up. The innocent boy, confused, stared at his father. Daddy, what's wrong? Are you mad at Dr. Mitchell? John's anger melted away in an instant. He quickly walked over to his son, kneeling down to his eye level. It's nothing, son, John said gently, his voice warming again. I'm just having a grown-up conversation. How's your picture coming along? Are you sad, Daddy? Edward asked, his small hand touching John's cheek, a simple gesture that nearly shattered the father's restraint. Your eyes look like Mommy's when she watches sad movies and needs a tissue. John swallowed hard, forcing a smile that never quite reached his eyes. It's nothing, son. Daddy's just a little tired from work. He looked down at his son's drawing a bright house with hasty sketches. It's beautiful. Is that our house? Edward nodded proudly, pointing to the pictures. This is you, this is Mommy, this is me, and this is Whiskers the cat. John lovingly patted his son's head, muttering, Perfect. As Edward turned back to his picture, John signaled for Dr. Mitchell to follow him into the study. The heavy wooden door slammed shut, and John's mask finally shattered. He leaned against the door, gasping for breath. Tell me the truth, James, he said, his voice hoarse. Without Chapman, how much time does Edward have? Dr. Mitchell, his face sagging with sadness, shook his head. Almost none. The regular treatments have failed. The boy's condition is progressing too quickly. Dr. Chapman's therapy is the only hope. John turned back to the window where the raindrops slid down the glass. 2 weeks. 2 weeks was all he had. If he couldn't do something, Edward's vibrant world would be lost forever. And in that moment, John Westbrook, the man who had built an empire, felt completely, utterly empty and powerless. Meanwhile, miles away from the Westbrook estate in a working-class neighborhood in East Chicago, the autumn rain continued to pour down, drenching the streets. There were no sturdy marble walls or soundproof glass windows here. Instead, the rain pelted relentlessly against the tin roof, blending with the sound of the wind howling through the rickety window frames. The musty smell of dampness and dirt mingled, creating an atmosphere that was completely different from the luxurious surroundings of John's home. Mary Mason, 7 years old, with neatly braided hair and bright brown eyes, struggled with heavy grocery bags. Her small back strained as she did her best to keep the apples from rolling out of the mesh bag. The soles of her worn sneakers, carefully repaired with glue by her mother, now splashed through the muddy puddles in the street. For Mary, this was not a burden, but a task she took pride in. She knew how hard her mother Sarah worked. Sarah Mason, a nurse at Westbrook General Hospital, walked with exhaustion etched deeply into her face. Dark circles under her eyes from a long night shift, yet her smile still radiated whenever she looked at her daughter. Sarah had dedicated her life to caring for others, and now every smile, every gesture from her daughter was the greatest motivation for her. "Thank you, my little girl," Sarah said, gently brushing her daughter's hair. "You've been so good today. I'll take you to the hospital to submit the reports, and then we can have ice cream, okay?" Mary's face lit up, her excitement palpable. To her, Westbrook Hospital was not a place of sickness or sorrow, but a magical place where her mother worked to bring health to others. She loved the long hallways, the strange smells, and especially the children's play area. That evening, the two of them arrived at the hospital. Even though it was Sarah's night shift, she needed to submit some important documents. "You sit here, okay?" Sarah instructed, pointing to a chair in the waiting area. "There are books and toys here. I'll be back soon." Mary obediently nodded, but after a few minutes, her curiosity got the better of her. The sound of muffled sobbing from a nearby office caught her attention. Mary, with the instincts of an innate detective, quietly crept over and peered inside. She saw a tall man in an expensive suit, his head resting on the desk, his shoulders trembling with unrestrained sobs. A photo of a young boy with golden hair and sparkling blue eyes smiling was placed on the desk. Mary was about to turn back when a file on the desk caught her eye. Edward Westbrook, AB negative blood type, genetic abnormalities. Mary didn't fully understand the terms, but she could feel the despair hidden within the words. Her small heart beat faster. Something didn't feel right. "Mary, there you are," Sarah's voice called out, filled with worry. "I told you to stay in the waiting room." Mary jumped, her hand jerking away from the file as if it had burned her. "I'm sorry, Mommy," she whispered. "I heard someone crying and wanted to see if they were okay." Sarah quickly pulled Mary away from the area, holding her hand tightly. "We shouldn't be here, Mary. This is a private area. That man is Mr. Westbrook. He's going through a difficult time." On the way home, Mary's mind was haunted by what she had heard. Mom, you know a lot about blood, right? You're a nurse. Sarah smiled, her worry easing. Yes, I know a few things. I work in pediatrics, so I have to understand the basics about blood. Why do you ask? What does abnormal blood type mean? Mary asked innocently, trying to hide her special interest. Sarah stopped and knelt down to her daughter's eye level. Mary, where did you hear that? Mary admitted, I saw it on a file for a boy named Edward. I didn't open it. I just saw the title. Sarah's face grew serious. Mary, those files are private. Patient information is confidential, and you shouldn't read anything about someone's health condition. It's wrong, and it can even break the law. Mary apologized sincerely, but her thoughts kept racing. Seeing that her daughter was truly sorry, Sarah softened her tone. I understand you're curious, but privacy is very important in the hospital. Do you understand? Mary nodded, but in her mind, the fragile thread of truth was already being woven. She remembered everything she had heard and seen. A desperate father, a boy who only had 2 weeks to live, and a secret about a blood type. She couldn't shake the thought. What if she had discovered something that no one else had? What if that tiny thread of truth was the last hope for a little boy? That night in the small apartment where Sarah and Mary lived, the storm outside had calmed, leaving only the soft patter of rain on the tin roof. But inside Mary's mind, another storm still raged. The soft golden light from the night lamp cast shadows on the wall, filled with pictures and certificates. Best reader, science fair participant, good citizen. Mary, her eyes wide open, lay awake. Edward, the man who had been crying, and the words genetic abnormalities swirled in her mind like a puzzle she was determined to solve. Mary knew her mother was tired after a long day at work, but she couldn't sleep without answers. Quietly, she slipped out of bed, tiptoeing across the cold floor, and made her way to the living room, where Sarah was scrolling through social media on her old laptop. Mom, Mary whispered, her voice so soft it was almost a breath. Sarah jumped, quickly closing her laptop. Mary, what are you doing here? I thought you were asleep. Her face showed concern. I can't sleep, Mary admitted. I have some questions I want to ask you. Sarah sighed, but smiled, patting the seat next to her on the couch. All right, my little one. I'll answer everything. Mom, I know you understand a lot about blood, right? Mary asked, her voice full of seriousness. Of course, Sarah replied, gently brushing her daughter's hair. That's part of my job. So, if both Mom and Dad have blood type O, what blood type would their child have? Mary asked, trying to keep her tone casual. Sarah paused, suddenly becoming serious. She was used to her daughter's innocent questions, but this one felt different. Genetically, their child would have to be blood type O. That's a given. What if their child had blood type AB? Mary continued, her eyes fixed on her mother, as if trying to read every thought on her face. Sarah frowned slightly. That's very, very rare. There could be some genetic mutation we don't fully understand. Or there may have been a mix-up. But like I said, it's nearly impossible in a modern hospital like Westbrook. Mary remained silent. She had her answer. Whether it was genetic mutation or a mix-up, there was one thing in common: it wasn't normal. But what if there was a mix-up? Mary patiently asked. What would happen? Sarah gently pulled her daughter into her arms. Mary, that's a very complicated question, but you don't need to worry about that. You're still too young. Mary said nothing, but her mind was working at full capacity. She connected what her mother had said with what she had seen and heard at the hospital. The boy's name was Edward Westbrook. The words on the file said AB negative blood type. And John Westbrook, the man she had seen crying, was the boy's father. She had a crazy theory, but it was the last hope to save the boy. The next morning, after Sarah left for her early shift, Mary sat alone in the kitchen, holding a colored pen and a sketchbook. Instead of drawing the usual pictures, she drew blood cells, red circles with the letters O, A, B, and AB. She had asked her mother for more information about blood the night before, and now she was drawing what she had learned. Mary thought about Edward the boy, with only 2 weeks to live. She thought about the abnormality in his blood type, and she thought about her mother's words about a mix-up. A theory formed in her mind. Could it be that Edward Westbrook wasn't John's biological son? And if he wasn't, where was John's real son? Could that boy with the matching blood type help save Edward? Mary's mind was working like a machine. She had connected the dots in a way no one else had. She knew that her mother and the doctors would say it was adult business and she shouldn't get involved. But she also knew that if she didn't do something, a little boy would die. 2 weeks was too short to wait. Mary, a 7-year-old girl, was faced with a big decision. Would it be a brave, crazy action or a mistake that could cause trouble for both her and her mother? She didn't know, but her heart told her that sometimes courage was the only thing that could change fate. The rare morning sunlight of a gloomy autumn day filtered through the small apartment window, but it was not strong enough to chase away the chill in the air. Mary Mason, only 7 years old, had woken up early. The storm in her heart showed no sign of abating. Yesterday, her mother had scolded her repeatedly. Sarah was worried, afraid that her daughter was venturing into something too big and dangerous. Her mother's words still echoed in Mary's ears. "This is adult business, Mary. You're not allowed to interfere." But how could Mary not interfere? She had seen the tears of a desperate father, had seen a boy fighting illness, and most importantly, she held a clue that no one else had. Mary waited for her mother to leave for work. She quietly prepared herself, choosing the simplest clothes, then stealthily opened the door. There was no limousine, no bodyguards, no servants, just a small girl with a brave heart walking alone on the wet sidewalk. The path to Westbrook Hospital was not far, but for a 7-year-old, it was a long and challenging journey. Mary had to cross busy streets, weave through hurried crowds, and try not to attract attention. When the automatic glass doors of Westbrook General Hospital slid open, Mary felt a rush of cold air. The familiar smell of disinfectant filled her nose, blending with the noise of hundreds of people. Nurses and doctors hurried down the long hallways, each with a serious and rushed expression. Mary kept close to the wall, trying not to be an obstacle. She felt like a tiny grain of sand in a vast desert, but her will was stronger than any mountain. Mary remembered the route her mother had taken her turn left at the cafe, past the gift shop, go through the double doors marked staff only, and turn right into a hallway with a blue ribbon on the wall. She had carefully memorized it all. At the end of the hallway, she found a room with a nameplate, Dr. R. Susan Reynolds, head of pediatric hematology. The door was slightly ajar, and a woman in a white coat was intently studying a stack of files. Her salt and pepper hair was neatly tied up, and her glasses were perched low on her nose, giving her a stern look. Mary took a deep breath. She knew this was her only chance. In a soft yet determined voice, she said, "Excuse me, ma'am." Dr. Reynolds looked up, her eyes filled with surprise as she saw the little girl standing in the doorway. "Hello, are you lost? This is not a visitor or patient area." "No, ma'am," Mary replied, giving her the most innocent smile she could muster. "I was wondering about abnormal blood types." She emphasized the term carefully, ensuring she pronounced it correctly. Dr. Reynolds raised an eyebrow, almost disappearing into her hairline. "That's quite an unusual question for a child like you. Are you interested in medicine?" Mary nodded enthusiastically. "My mom's a nurse. She says I'll be a doctor someday because I ask a lot of questions." The doctor smiled, her stern face softening. "Well, that's wonderful. Curiosity is the root of all scientific discovery. Blood types are really interesting. They follow very specific genetic rules, like how they have to match what we get from our mom and dad, right?" Mary interjected, eager to show she understood. "Exactly," Dr. Reynolds said, clearly impressed. "For example, if both parents have blood type O, their child must have blood type O. Genetically, they can't have any other blood type." Mary's eyes widened. "So what if the child's blood type doesn't match? What if the test shows they have a different blood type?" The serious look returned to Dr. Reynolds' face as she looked at the girl, surprisingly patient. "Well, if medical tests show that a child has a blood type that couldn't come from their parents, there are usually 2 possibilities. Either there's a very rare genetic mutation that we don't fully understand, or—" She paused as if choosing her words carefully. "Or what, ma'am?" Mary urged. "Or there was some kind of mistake at some point." Dr. Reynolds said, her voice softening. "But that's extremely rare, especially nowadays. Hospitals have very strict rules to prevent such things from happening." Just then, the office door opened, and John Westbrook stepped out. His eyes were red, his expensive suit wrinkled, and his face bore the signs of exhaustion, with stubble growing on his chin. John didn't immediately recognize Mary. "Dr. Reynolds, any news on Dr. Chapman?" he asked in a hoarse voice full of worry. "We're still trying to reach her, Mr. Westbrook," Dr. Reynolds replied. "The bad weather has destroyed the roads. It'll take another day or two. John ran his hands through his hair in sheer frustration. Every hour counts, he muttered, and finally noticed Mary standing there, her big eyes looking directly at him. Who is this little girl? Dr. Reynolds placed a hand on Mary's shoulder. This is Mary Mason. She just asked me some very smart questions about blood types. She wants to be a doctor. John tried to smile but failed. He knelt down to her eye level, the fabric of his expensive suit wrinkling at the knees. Is that so? We need good doctors in this world. He looked into Mary's eyes, and a brief recognition flickered across his face. What's your name? Mary Mason, sir. My mom's Sarah Mason. She's a nurse in pediatrics. Mary's voice remained steady, though her heart raced as she stood before the man she had seen in his most heartbreaking moment. A strange expression passed over John's face. Mason. Sarah Mason. He stood up abruptly, the sudden movement startling Dr. Reynolds. I have to go. Please continue trying to reach Dr. Chapman. John hurried away without saying another word, leaving Mary and Dr. Reynolds bewildered. Mary realized she had succeeded. She had met John Westbrook, and more importantly, he knew who she was. This meeting wasn't just a coincidence. It was a date with destiny. And Mary, a 7-year-old girl, was ready to seize it. That night, Sarah's anger and anxiety erupted like an uncontrollable fire. When she arrived home, she found Mary sitting alone in the living room, her face full of remorse. But that remorse couldn't soothe the fear that had squeezed the life out of her heart. Mary Mason, do you have any idea what you've done? Sarah's voice trembled not from anger, but from terror. I told you to stay put. You wandered around the hospital, a dangerous place, and you even approached Mr. Westbrook. Do you realize I could lose my job because of this? Sarah stopped talking, collapsing into a chair, her face buried in her hands. Mary looked at her mother, her small lips pressed tightly together. She knew she had done something wrong. She knew her mother was worried for both of them, but she also knew that if she hadn't acted, a little boy would die. Her mother's fear and the rules of the adults could not be bigger than a human life. I'm sorry, Mom. Mary whispered, tears starting to fall down her cheeks. I just wanted to help. Help with what, Mary? Sarah looked up, her eyes red. You're a 7-year-old child. You can't solve grown-up problems, especially not life-and-death ones. You have to promise me that you'll never get involved in something like this again. Mary didn't say anything. She couldn't promise. She couldn't give up. That night, Sarah tried to keep Mary close, watching an old movie together on the small TV. But Mary's mind was still in her own world, the world of missing pieces, and a boy counting down the days. The next morning, the sun rose, its weak rays streaming through the window, casting light on the floating dust particles in the air. Sarah had left early, leaving Mary alone in the quiet of the house. This was her chance. Mary sat in front of the old landline phone, holding a small red notebook. The page was open to a familiar number, Westbrook Industries. Her heart pounded loudly so hard that she thought it might burst out of her chest. She placed the phone on the table and took a deep breath. Inhale, exhale. The palms of her hands were damp with sweat. Mary began dialing, one number at a time, slowly and carefully. Beep, beep, beep. The ringing felt like it lasted an eternity. Westbrook Industries, how may I help you? A professional cold voice answered. Mary took another deep breath and tried to make her voice stronger, older. I need to speak with Mr. Westbrook about his son. I'm sorry, Mr. Westbrook is not taking calls at the moment. Who is this? I'm Mary Mason. My mom is Sarah Mason, a nurse at Westbrook Hospital. I have something important to tell him. There was silence on the other end of the line. Mary could hear the sound of keys tapping. Then the voice came back on. Please hold for a moment. Mary waited. Each second felt like an eternity. She imagined what was happening on the other side of the line. They were probably putting it on speakerphone and looking at each other with doubt. A little girl calling a billionaire's company ridiculous. But Mary didn't give up. She gripped the pen tightly, determined to see it through. After a while, a deep, hoarse voice spoke. Mr. John Westbrook. This is John Westbrook. Who am I speaking with? His voice was powerful, but there was a hint of exhaustion, of weariness. Mr. Westbrook, I'm Mary Mason. We met yesterday at the hospital. Mary's voice dropped, her courage seemingly fading. Do you want to be a doctor? John's voice seemed to recognize something. How did you get this number? It's in the directory, Mary said simply. I need to talk to you about something very important regarding Edward. John took a deep breath, the sound of tension in his exhale. His voice turned cold. "What do you know about my son? This is confidential medical information." "How do you know?" "I saw it on a file, but that's not important right now. What's important is that I think I know why there's that abnormality and how to find the real parents of the boy." Silence engulfed the call. This silence was more terrifying than any scream. Mary could hear her heart pounding in her ears. She knew she had crossed a line, but she couldn't stop now. Finally, John spoke, his voice controlled, but still trembling with emotion. "Little girl, I don't know what game you're playing, but this is not the right time. I'll hang up and call your mother to discuss this privacy violation." "Please don't hang up," Mary begged, her voice suddenly stronger. "I'm not playing games, I'm trying to help. Edward needs special treatment from his real parents to survive, right? I heard you talking about needing a bone marrow donor." Another long silence. Mary could hear John's heavy breathing. "How could you know that?" Mary explained, her words pouring out like a stream. "I heard you talking about needing to find Dr. Chapman, and then I saw the blood type report. Mr. Westbrook, 5 years ago, there was another boy born at Westbrook Hospital on the same day as Edward. I think there was a mix-up. I think the other family has your biological son, and you have their son." John's voice became filled with despair. This is absurd. The hospital has very strict rules." "But that explains the blood type abnormality," Mary interrupted, her voice full of confidence. "And if that other family has the right blood type for Edward, they could help save him, even if Dr. Chapman isn't back yet." "Who are they? The people you're talking about?" John asked, his voice urgent. "I don't know their names," Mary admitted. "But Mrs. Jenkins at the library said they just moved to the city when their son was born. They might still be here." John's voice softened. "Mary, I really appreciate that you've tried to help, but this is a serious medical situation that requires professionals. I can't act based on the guesses of a little girl, no matter how well-intentioned." "Then check the hospital records," Mary suggested, not willing to back down so easily. "See if anyone else had a son born on that day. Their child will be the same age as Edward. Mr. Westbrook, you own the hospital. Surely you have a way. Is Edward's life worth less than privacy?" Once again, silence engulfed the call. When John spoke again, his voice had completely changed, as though he was seeing everything from a new perspective. "Why are you doing this, Mary? Why do you care so much about my son?" Mary thought about the picture of Edward on John's desk. She thought about the man who had cried, believing no one could hear him. She thought about her mother, who would do anything to protect her. "Because everyone deserves someone fighting for them," she said simply. "And because 2 weeks isn't enough, but it's all Edward has." John took a deep breath. When he spoke, his voice was more resolute. "Mary Mason, we need to have a serious conversation about this. Where can I meet you?" "I'm at home," Mary said. "My mom works until 4 p.m. I'm not allowed to have visitors when she's not home, but this is an emergency." "No, I won't come to your house without your mom there," John said, his voice slightly confused. "Can someone bring you to my office? Maybe Mrs. Grantham?" "Yes." Mary set her eyes wide. "She can take me." "Good," John said. "I'll send a car to pick both of you up in 30 minutes. Be ready." Mary nodded, even though John couldn't see. After hanging up, Mary stood there alone in the small house with a strange feeling. She had succeeded. She had bet everything. And now the fate of 2 boys and 2 families lay in her hands. Exactly 30 minutes later, a sleek black limousine came to a stop in front of Mary's old apartment. Mrs. Grantham, the elderly neighbor, with the distinctive smell of camphor, was already waiting, dressed neatly in her oldest wool coat. She nervously patted her hair, her face filled with both excitement and anxiety. "Are you sure it's Mr. John Westbrook, Mary?" she asked, her voice trembling. Mary simply nodded, the determination in her eyes dispelling any doubt in Mrs. Grantham's mind. The trip from the working-class neighborhood to downtown Chicago felt like a journey through time. The car glided smoothly along the road, isolating the 2 of them from the noisy, dusty world outside. Mrs. Grantham kept exclaiming continuously, pointing to the towering glass and steel skyscrapers that reached into the sky. Mary, however, stared out of the window, not in surprise. In her mind, these scenes had been shaped long ago from the stories her mother told about where she worked and from what Mary had imagined about John Westbrook's world. Arriving in downtown, the car stopped in front of a gleaming skyscraper made entirely of glass, reflecting the sky and surrounding buildings. The Westbrook Industries emblem gleamed in metal, towering proudly. "Oh my," Mrs. Grantham whispered. "It's like a palace." They were greeted by a polite security guard who escorted them into a vast lobby with a gleaming marble floor and a large fountain in the center. Then they were led by a secretary impeccably dressed in a tailored suit with a neatly bobbed haircut to the top floor. The stainless steel elevator doors slid open, revealing a spacious, silent office space. The scent of fine wood and leather lingered in the air. John Westbrook's office was larger than both Mary and Sarah's apartment combined. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, with the cars below looking as tiny as grains of sand. Priceless paintings adorned the walls, and a massive mahogany desk sat at the center of the room. But what caught Mary's attention most were the photographs on John's desk. All of them were pictures of Edward at various ages, from a newborn to the 5-year-old boy he was now. The love of a father, no matter how deeply hidden, could never be fully concealed. John Westbrook stood up from behind the desk, looking much tidier than the day before, but his eyes still bore the dark circles of sleepless nights. "Ms. Mason," he said in a warm, respectful tone, "and Mrs. Grantham, thank you both for coming." He gestured for them to sit in the large leather chairs. "Would you like something to drink, coffee, tea, soda, or juice?" "A cup of hot tea would be wonderful," Mrs. Grantham said, clearly delighted by the experience. "Just water for me, please," Mary said, her voice growing smaller as she settled into the enormous leather chair. Once the secretary left, John leaned forward, his expression turning serious. "Now, Mary," he said, "I want you to tell me the whole story, from the beginning to the end." Mary took a deep breath. At first her voice trembled, but it grew steadier as she explained her theory. She told him about overhearing his phone call, seeing the medical records, her conversation with Dr. Reynolds, and how she connected it all with the story of another boy born on the same day. John listened attentively, not missing a single word. The skepticism on his face gradually faded, replaced by intense focus. He listened to a 7-year-old girl explain a complicated medical issue, something his own experts had missed. When Mary finished, the room was silent. "I've done a little research," John said cautiously. Indeed, there was another boy born on the same day as Edward at Westbrook Hospital. The family's name is Turner. They moved here from Chicago just a week before the birth. "Mary, you're remarkable." Mary's eyes widened. "Have you contacted them yet?" John shook his head. "Not yet. I wanted to speak with you first to understand exactly what you're suggesting. Do you realize that if you're right, and that's still a big if, this would change not only Edward's life, but also the Turners' lives? Their son is actually my biological son." "I know," Mary said seriously. "It will be hard for everyone, but isn't it worth finding the truth to save Edward?" John remained silent, staring at the determined little girl in front of him. He had met countless people on his career path, but he had never encountered someone with such courage and intelligence. "You know Mary Mason," he said. "You are extraordinary." He reached for the phone. "All right, let's find out if your theory is correct." Mary held her breath as John dialed the number. The fate of a 5-year-old boy was hanging in the balance, and she was the one who had set everything into motion. "Hello, is this the Turner residence?" John's voice was calm and professional, betraying no emotion. "This is John Westbrook. I'm calling about a sensitive matter regarding your son. Would it be possible to meet today? This is very urgent." He listened for a moment, then continued. "I understand this may seem strange, but I assure you this is a life or death matter. Yes, literally. My son is very ill, and there is a possibility. This is very complicated. I would like to explain it to you in person. Would 3 p.m. work? I'll send a car to pick you up." John hung up and looked at Mary, his face a mix of hope and fear. "They'll be here. Now we wait." 3 hours of waiting felt endless. Mrs. Grantham was taken to a comfortable waiting room with a TV and magazines, while Mary stayed in John's office answering his increasingly detailed questions about her theory. John paced back and forth by the window, constantly adjusting his tie and checking the clock every few minutes. He was used to controlling everything, but now he felt completely powerless. All he could do was wait for strangers whose son's fate was now in their hands. At exactly 3 p.m., the office door opened and a couple entered. They looked nervous and out of place in this luxurious setting. The man had sandy brown hair, was gentle-looking, and wore khakis and an old shirt. The woman was petite, with chestnut hair, dressed in a simple floral dress. Both had tense expressions. "Mr. and Mrs. Turner, thank you for coming," John said, stepping forward and shaking their hands. "You said this is a life-or-death matter," Mr. Turner said, his voice firm. "That's not something we can ignore, especially from someone like you." John gestured for them to sit. "This is Mary Mason. She is the reason we're here today." The Turner family looked at Mary with confusion, wondering what role a little girl could play in this crisis. "Hello, sir and ma'am," Mary said, suddenly feeling shy in front of the strangers she had inadvertently changed the fate of. "Mary, darling," John said gently, "can you wait outside with Mrs. Grantham? I need to talk to Mr. and Mrs. Turner for a bit." Mary wanted to protest. This was her theory after all. But she realized that the conversation ahead would be difficult, and it wasn't something a child should be part of. She nodded quietly and left the room, but not without giving the Turner family a long look, hoping they would be brave enough to face the truth. Mary had left, taking with her her innocence and courage. The door to John Westbrook's office closed, but the silence inside was more terrifying than any noise. John sat facing Robert and Jessica Turner, two people trembling with anxiety and confusion. They looked at John, the man they only knew through financial news, and could not understand why they were here in this foreign, lavish place discussing their son. "I know this is difficult." John began, his voice deep and full of empathy. "I'm sorry for bringing you here so suddenly, but my son Edward is critically ill. He has a rare genetic disease and has only 2 weeks left to live." Jessica Turner put her hand to her mouth, her eyes wide in horror. "I don't understand, Mr. Westbrook. What does this have to do with us?" John took a deep breath. He had prepared for this moment, but no words could fully convey the cruelty of it. He explained Edward's condition, the need for a compatible bone marrow donor, and the genetic abnormality that had been discovered. "Edward has AB negative blood, while both my wife Elizabeth and I have O positive blood. Scientifically, that is impossible. It points to only one possibility." John hesitated, looking directly into Robert's eyes. "That Edward is not our biological child, and your son David was born on the same day and at the same hospital as Edward." Silence enveloped the room. John's words hit like a ticking time bomb. Robert Turner, the mild-mannered man, stood up abruptly. "This is crazy. David is our son. He has my nose, my wife's eyes. We've raised him for the past 5 years." "I understand how you feel," John said, trying to stay calm. "I felt the same way when I first heard this theory, but we need to uncover the truth. This is the only chance to save Edward. All I need is a small blood sample from you and your son for testing. If the results don't match, I will apologize for the disturbance and never bother your family again." Jessica Turner burst into tears. David isn't our biological child." She looked at her husband, her face full of anguish. Robert embraced his wife, his face pale. They had agreed. They had done something no one could have expected. They had gone to Westbrook Hospital. The private meeting room at Westbrook Hospital became the place where the truth was exposed. John and Elizabeth, his wife, were there. Elizabeth Westbrook, a beautiful, graceful woman, famous for her elegance and poise, was now holding her husband's hand tightly, her eyes swollen from crying. The two of them looked at each other wordlessly. Their love for Edward was unquestionable, but the pain of knowing that the boy was not their flesh and blood had plunged them into an invisible fear. And then the Turner family entered. They brought David, the 5-year-old boy with brown hair and gentle eyes. David was holding a toy dinosaur and laughing softly. His face still had the sleepy look of a child who had just woken up. David had no idea that his fate, and that of both families, was being decided at that very moment. A doctor entered holding 2 files. He looked at both families, his face full of sorrow. "I'm very sorry to inform you that the DNA test results have confirmed Mary's theory." Those words were like knives slicing through the hearts of both women. Jessica cried uncontrollably. Elizabeth, however, did not. She just quietly shed tears. Her eyes stared at David, the boy she had unknowingly raised for 5 years. The boy with the distinctive blue eyes of the Westbrook family. The eyes that were identical to John's. And now she knew that this boy was her husband's biological son, while the child she had raised was the son of a stranger. "We need David to donate bone marrow," the doctor said. "We need to test for compatibility." Robert Turner nodded, his face full of determination. "We'll do whatever we can to help the boy." As the doctors prepared for the tests, a man in a black suit entered. It was Franklin Pierce, the hospital's lawyer. He was accompanied by a young woman, a representative from the risk management department. "I understand this is not the right time," Pierce said, his voice cold and professional, the tone of someone who was used to handling crises. "But there are legal and public relations issues that need to be addressed immediately." John Westbrook's anger flared like a fire. "Do you hear me? My son is dying, and you're here to talk about public relations? Mr. Westbrook, that's exactly what we need to talk about," Pierce said, his voice growing hoarse. "Our preliminary investigation has uncovered a troubling truth about how this mistake happened." He opened the file and began talking about the night Edward and David were born, a night of heavy storms that caused a power outage throughout the area. For 40 minutes, the electronic record system was disconnected. In the chaos, the identification bands were swapped. 4 children were in the nursery, and this mistake went unnoticed. "Just carelessness," Jessica Turner shouted. "People didn't pay attention and swapped our children." "Not exactly, Mrs. Turner," Pierce replied. "About 2 years ago, a nurse who worked that night expressed concerns about the misidentification. She suggested that all families with children born that night should be contacted to verify." John's voice became dangerous. "And those concerns were ignored by someone in the hospital's management." Pierce nodded, his eyes filled with regret. "It seems so, sir. The manager felt that contacting families without concrete evidence would cause unnecessary worry." The room became silent. The painful truth was exposed. 2 years ago, these people knew about the potential mix-up, and they had kept silent while Edward had lived every day with a growing disease. The outrage surged not just from John and Elizabeth, but also from Robert and Jessica. When the lawyer left, Robert Turner turned to John. "I hope you understand that we are not seeking financial compensation from this," he said, his voice sincere and full of emotion. "We just want to live a normal life." "I understand," John said, his voice softening, "and I deeply admire your integrity. But the negligence of the hospital has caused real loss, and there will be consequences." The two fathers looked at each other, and in that moment they understood each other. Wealth and poverty no longer stood as barriers. Their love for their children and their anger at the injustice had united them. They were no longer two men from different worlds. They had become fathers with a common mission to fight for justice and protect their children. John looked at Edward, the boy lying in the hospital bed, and then at David, the boy playing carefree. He knew that this painful truth would be the beginning of a new journey, a journey full of hardships, but also a journey of healing and boundless love. The departure of the lawyer and risk manager did not dissipate the anger and pain they had brought. However, it revealed a more powerful truth in this room. They were no longer strangers from two different worlds. Now they were fathers and mothers, sharing the same fear and one hope. John Westbrook, a man who had always been in control of everything in his life, now found himself sitting helplessly. He looked at Robert Turner, the man he had just discovered was the father of his biological son, and in his eyes there was no longer the arrogance of a billionaire, only the deep empathy of a father. "The boy will be fine," Robert said, his voice hoarse. He looked toward Jessica, who had her head resting on his shoulder. "Jessica and I have donated bone marrow. The doctors say we're a perfect match." John nodded, trying to hold back the overwhelming emotions inside. Elizabeth, however, couldn't. She stood up, walked over to Jessica, and naturally placed a hand on her shoulder. "Thank you. Thank you so much," Elizabeth said, her voice trembling. "I don't know what to say anymore." Jessica looked up, her eyes red. "You've cared for Edward. You've loved him, given him a good life. We should be thanking you." Two women from completely different worlds now shared the same pain and gratitude. They had raised each other's children, and in that moment they healed the cracks in their destinies with the love of a mother. Just then, the waiting room door opened and a nurse entered. "Dr. Chapman wanted to inform you that Edward's surgery is going well. His vital signs are stable." A wave of relief spread through the room. John leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. His face was weary but filled with hope. He saw Sarah Mary's mother standing in the corner of the room, and in her eyes he saw empathy and gratitude. A few hours later, Mary and David were brought to the waiting room. Mary, with the sensitivity of a child, sensed the shift in the atmosphere. The tension and distance from earlier had dissipated, replaced by warmth and unity. David, the 5-year-old boy with brown hair and John's blue eyes, immediately approached Mary. "You're Mary, right? My mom says you're really smart." Mary nodded, offering him a bright smile. She had heard about David the boy with the eyes identical to Edward's father. She had heard how he had unknowingly become Edward's hero. "My mom says you have a really cool dinosaur collection," David said, his eyes sparkling with admiration. "I don't have a dinosaur collection," Mary laughed. "That's Edward's." David puckered his lips innocently. "Really? My dad says we have the same blood type." All the adults in the room turned their attention to the two children. Mary looked at Robert and Jessica, then turned to John and Elizabeth. She knew both families had decided not to tell the two boys the truth. Mary skillfully redirected the conversation. Yes, you guys are like brothers." "Brothers?" David asked, his eyes wide. "So we'll have 2 dads and 2 moms." David's innocence made everyone in the room feel lighter. Elizabeth couldn't hold back her tears. She walked over and hugged David. "Yes, son, you'll have 2 more people who love you." David smiled, not fully understanding the meaning of those words, but sensing the warmth and love. He looked toward John, and for the first time, John looked straight into his biological son's eyes. A strange and deeply emotional feeling spread through him. He knelt down and said, "Hello, David. I'm John. It's a pleasure to meet you." David looked at John, then at his mother. Jessica smiled and nodded. "Hello, sir." David said, his voice soft but filled with trust. In that moment, a miracle happened. Both families had accepted the truth, and more importantly, they had accepted each other. The crack in their destinies was no longer a wound. It had become a path, a doorway for light and love to enter. As everyone returned to the tense waiting, Mary and David found a quiet corner for themselves. David told Mary about Edward's dinosaur collection, his favorite toys, and his dreams. Mary listened, and in her heart, a sense of peace rose. She had done it. She had brought hope to a boy who was fighting death. "I hope I'll get to meet Edward when he wakes up," David said. "We'll be best friends." Mary smiled. "I'm sure you two will be the best of friends." David nodded seriously. "My mom says love is the most important thing, and I think that's true." Mary looked at David, and in that moment she realized that the truth wasn't always ugly. Sometimes the truth could hurt, but it could also heal. And for these 2 boys, the truth had brought them something more wonderful than any gift in the world a sibling. 3 months later, the first cold winds of winter swept through Chicago, bringing with them the biting chill of the end-of-year days. But in the lives of the Westbrook and Turner families, warmth was overflowing. Edward had fully recovered. The boy with his golden hair and sparkling blue eyes could now run, laugh, and live a life as full as any other child's. For John and Elizabeth Westbrook, the sense of relief and gratitude was indescribable. They had endured 3 months full of hardship, not just the worry over Edward's health, but also the internal struggle of accepting a cruel truth. Edward was not their biological child, but he was still their son. The love they had for him was real, and no DNA test could ever change that. Meanwhile, Robert and Jessica Turner were also undergoing a deeply emotional adjustment. They had learned that David was not their biological child, but they loved him with all their hearts. And, more than anything, they had learned to love Edward the boy they had unknowingly given birth to, and were grateful that Edward was still alive, healthy, and happy. With John's help, the Turner family had moved into a larger house in the same neighborhood as the Westbrooks. The 2 boys, Edward and David, attended the same school, played together on the same playground, and spent almost all their time together. They were like twin brothers with an invisible bond that tied them together. One afternoon, Robert Turner was helping Edward fix a broken toy car, while Jessica Turner and Elizabeth Westbrook were preparing dinner together. John Westbrook, looking relaxed, was playing a game of chess with David. Everything unfolded naturally and warmly. "I don't know what I would do without you two," Elizabeth said, her voice full of emotion. "Thank you for caring for my son." Jessica smiled. "You've done the same for my son. I think we are a family." John heard those words and felt an odd sense of happiness. He had once thought that family was something defined by bloodlines, by wealth, but now he knew that family was defined by love and sacrifice. A week later, Westbrook General Hospital held a grand opening ceremony. Hundreds of people attended, including city officials, doctors, and reporters. A temporary stage had been set up with a large banner, the Mary Mason Children's Center. Mary Mason, with her neatly braided hair and bright brown eyes, stood between her mother and John Westbrook, feeling nervous and shy in the new dress her mother had bought for her. "Do I really have to go up there?" she whispered. "Just for a moment, my little one," Sarah reassured her. "You don't have to say anything." John bent down, smiling brightly. "Are you scared of the stage, Mary? I thought a brave girl like you, who called a billionaire and told him his son wasn't his biological child, wouldn't be scared of anything." Mary stuck out her tongue. "That's different. That was important." "This is just as important," John said. "This new center will help thousands of children for decades to come. And that's thanks to you." The ceremony began with long speeches. Finally, John Westbrook stepped up to the podium. His outward appearance still exuded power, but his voice was filled with warmth and sincerity. "3 months ago, my son Edward was on the brink of death," he began. "He had only 2 weeks to live unless he received a special treatment. And today, he is healthy, energetic, and looking forward to starting kindergarten next year." A round of applause erupted. John waited for the applause to subside before continuing. "Many people will call this a miracle, and in some ways it is. But it is also the result of the extraordinary courage and intelligence of a 7-year-old girl. When the adults, including myself, missed the truth right in front of us, Mary Mason connected the dots and refused to remain silent." Mary blushed as everyone turned to look at her. The Mary Mason Children's Center is named after her, not because she saved a child, but because her actions embodied the values we hope this center will represent: intelligence, compassion, and the courage to speak the truth. He motioned for Mary to come up on stage. She walked up, and John placed a hand on her shoulder. Then he invited the Turner family up. Robert and Jessica walked to the stage and stood beside Mary, forming a protective circle around her. 4 adults, 2 families were now one thanks to the courage of a 7-year-old girl. "This center is not just a new facility," John concluded. "It represents hope, healing, and the extraordinary capacity of families to face unimaginable circumstances. It represents the difference one person can make, no matter how young or small." After the ceremony, reporters crowded around Mary. "How does it feel to have a hospital center named after you?" one reporter asked. Mary hesitated. "It feels strange. I didn't do anything special." "You saved a child," the reporter said. "Most people would consider that something special." "I just saw something that the adults missed," Mary said. "Anyone can do it if they pay attention." Mary slipped through the crowd and ran to where Edward and David were waiting for her. "Mary, come see the new playground," Edward called out. The 3 children ran inside, leaving behind the adults and their complicated stories to live in their own world, where miracles just needed a little courage to become reality. 3 months later, the winter winds had replaced the chill of autumn in Chicago. The streets were covered with the first layer of snow, but in the lives of the Westbrook and Turner families, warmth filled every corner. Edward had fully recovered. The boy, with his golden hair and sparkling blue eyes, was now running, laughing, and living a full life, just like any other child. For John and Elizabeth Westbrook, every moment was a miracle. They had endured 3 months of hardship, not only worrying about Edward's health, but also grappling with the internal struggle of accepting a harsh truth. Edward was not their biological child, but he was still their son. The love they had for him was real, and no DNA test could ever change that. Their love for David had also grown a love born out of gratitude and understanding. Meanwhile, Robert and Jessica Turner were going through an emotional adjustment of their own. They knew that David was not their biological child, but they loved him with all their hearts. More than that, they had learned to love Edward, the boy they had unknowingly given birth to, and were thankful that Edward was still alive, healthy, and happy. With John's help, the Turner family moved to a larger home in the same neighborhood as the Westbrooks. The 2 boys, Edward and David, attended the same school, played on the same playground, and spent almost all their time together. They were like twin brothers, an invisible bond that had tightly connected them. Every evening, the 2 families would share dinner together. There were cozy little dinners times they would watch movies together, and moments where they would simply sit quietly and enjoy the peace after the storm. The relationship between John and Robert, between Elizabeth and Jessica, gradually became closer and more intimate, not only because of the 2 boys, but also because of the understanding and sharing between them. "I don't know what I would do without you two," Elizabeth said, her voice full of emotion. "Thank you for taking care of my son." Jessica smiled. "You've done the same for my son. I think we are a family." John heard those words and felt a strange happiness. He had once thought that family was something defined by bloodlines, by wealth, but now he knew that family was defined by love and sacrifice. A week later, Westbrook General Hospital held a grand opening ceremony. Hundreds of people attended, including city officials, doctors, and reporters. A temporary stage had been set up with a large banner, the Mary Mason Children's Center. And Mary Mason, with her neatly braided hair and bright brown eyes, stood between her mother and John Westbrook, feeling extremely nervous and shy in the new dress her mother had bought for her. "Do I really have to go up there?" she whispered. "Just for a moment, my little one," Sarah reassured her. "You don't have to say anything." John bent down, smiling brightly. "Are you scared of the stage, Mary? I thought a brave girl like you, who called a billionaire and told him his son wasn't his biological child, wouldn't be scared of anything." Mary stuck out her tongue. "That's different. That was important." "This is just as important," John said. "This new center will help thousands of children for decades to come, and that's thanks to you." The ceremony began with lengthy speeches. Finally, John Westbrook stepped up to the podium. His outward appearance was still powerful, but his voice was filled with warmth and sincerity. "3 months ago, my son Edward was on the brink of death," he began. "He had only 2 weeks left to live unless he received a special treatment. And today, he is healthy, active, and looking forward to starting kindergarten next year." A round of applause erupted. John waited for the applause to subside before continuing. "Many people will call this a miracle, and in some ways it is. But it is also the result of the extraordinary courage and intelligence of a 7-year-old girl. When the adults, including myself, missed the truth right in front of us, Mary Mason connected the dots and refused to remain silent." Mary blushed as everyone turned to look at her. The Mary Mason Children's Center is named after her, not because she saved a child, but because her actions embodied the values we hope this center will represent: intelligence, compassion, and the courage to speak the truth. He motioned for Mary to come up on stage. She walked up, and John placed a hand on her shoulder. Then he invited the Turner family up. Robert and Jessica walked to the stage and stood beside Mary, forming a protective circle around her. 4 adults, 2 families were now one thanks to the courage of a 7-year-old girl. "This center is not just a new facility," John concluded. "It represents hope, healing, and the extraordinary capacity of families to face unimaginable circumstances. It represents the difference one person can make, no matter how young or small." After the ceremony, reporters crowded around Mary. "How does it feel to have a hospital center named after you?" one reporter asked. Mary hesitated. "It feels strange. I didn't do anything special." "You saved a child," the reporter said. "Most people would consider that something special." "I just saw something that the adults missed," Mary said. "Anyone can do it if they pay attention." Mary slipped through the crowd and ran to where Edward and David were waiting for her. "Mary, come see the new playground," Edward called out. The 3 children ran inside, leaving behind the adults and their complicated stories to live in their own world, where miracles just needed a little courage to become reality. What we learned from Mary's incredible journey is that sometimes the greatest heroes come in the smallest packages. In a world that often seems driven by power and money, it was love, courage, and the determination of a child that saved the day. If you were moved by this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales of bravery and hope. And remember, no matter how big or small, anyone can make a difference. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.